Running Sentences presents The Bumbling Knights, Part 2, which is information. True to innkeeper Lucky's word, the next morning they headed out to meet a witch. It cost more than a pretty coin, and things only seemed to get more complicated upon meeting this witch. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and incidences within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, living, dead, or real incidences is purely coincidental. Any resemblance to any other stories is also of pure coincidence. Copyright 2021, Michael Honore. All rights reserved. Morning struck, and as Marcus found his way to the dining room for breakfast, he stretched and yawned, and then stretched some more. His bones and muscles thanked him for finding a soft bed that didn't have strange smells or uncomfortable feelings to it, and had come with a comfortable blanket to keep him warm. Henry, on the other hand, was already at the dining table, having made the food and his plate disappear in record time, and looking about for some more. There was a strange guest or two at the far end of the table, but they drew no more than a cursory glance from Marcus, who paid more attention to just getting sat down. The innkeeper had said few guests, but that didn't mean no guests, and Marcus noted that. As the thought lazily rolled past about in his mind, the innkeeper came in with a fresh plate of food, and placed it before him. Thank you, innkeep. Please call me Lucky. And if you're still interested in finding that, lady? Yes, Mr. Lucky, we are, and, perhaps we could do that right after this meal? I'll go shut down for the morning, then. The big burly innkeep was light on his feet, and soon gone from the room, but Marcus was paying more attention to his plate of food in front of him as his stomach gurgled for the food. Henry, of course, had come a little bit nearer and was peering very carefully at the plate next to him, which Marcus sat in front of. The boy was obviously still hungry from the looks of it. So Marcus scraped a bit of food from his plate onto the boy's, and then the two set about eating. When the meal was done, Lucky had summoned them to the kitchen to wait for him while he got ready. The man seemed to be rushing about as if he'd forgotten something or something was wrong. From one end of the room to the other onward the innkeeper went. Marcus eventually grabbed a tankard and filled it with some water from a nearby barrel. When Lucky finally did come to a stop, huffing and puffing, in front of them, he held it out for the innkeeper to drink. Have some, take in some air. I can't have you falling over on our mission to your friend or associate. Lucky took the drink and greedily downed it. Then, after a few deep breaths of air, the man nodded, headed to the door behind them, which was the back door to this establishment. They didn't get very far as Lucky came to a stop just outside of the back door to his alehouse, and once both Henry and Marcus were out, made sure that he locked the door. Finished with that, he turned to them and put a finger to his lips. It's very important that you should follow me and ask no questions or talk. We will be silent. Marcus nodded, and so the trio set off. The path that Lucky cut for them was not a simple one, as it cut its way through alleyways that each seemed to get darker as they went. There were several times where Marcus found himself stepping over people lying on the streets, and he wasn't sure if they were alive or not, and he'd even accidentally kicked a few along the way. Still, there would be no talking, even though it was getting harder to see, and talking to where they were going might provide some help or comfort. Lucky, however, continued deeper and deeper down the alleyways. They arrived at another back alleyway, only this one led to a gate at the wall to the city. It was manned by a black night guard and had a line of people trying to get in and out. Without a word, Lucky jumped in line and waited for the slow-moving line to take its next step forward. Marcus was right behind him, holding on to Henry to make sure that the boy didn't wander off or get lost in what they were doing. He had kept a tight grip on the boy all throughout this little journey, though. and they all remained silent, listening to the barking voice of the knight. "Reason for leaving?"
"To visit my relatives outside the walls."
"Costs for such a visit 2 bronze pieces."
There was a further exchange, but it was drowned out as Marcus found himself unconsciously reaching for his own pouch of money. He contemplated just throwing his money out there so that the line of people could cross over undisturbed, but then figured the guard would probably lie and collect larger and larger fees. So he held his purse, and they finally wound up in front of the guard who looked them over.
"You lot aren't the usual. What's your reason for crossing?"
Lucky merely held up a hand with a few coins in it. The guard looked at that, and then over at the three, nodding in appreciation. The money was soon gone from Mr. Lucky's hand, and through the gate they went. Passing through this left them standing in a small, sprawled-out area with houses and shops pretty far around the area, and it all sloped downwards and away from the wall. Lucky had once again turned to them and put his finger to his lips to remind them of their pact, which Marcus and Henry could only nod to as they began walking down a road leading into this outside city, which they would wind their way through, and it would all come to a grinding halt in front of a black building bearing the sign "The Black Lair." It was a rowdy place where drunkards seemed sloshed to the gills outside of the place, and fights were sparked with the littlest of movements. Marcus danced around one such fight as Lucky came to a stop near the front door. As another fight tumbled out of that, he turned to them. "We can talk now. No one will say anything about witches. They don't much care here." "What was that with the Black Knight guarding at the gate?" "The way most people get out of the city, or in, as the main gate doesn't like letting people in unless they really have to. Fees go to charity, or so the knights say. I don't think anyone's seen where the money goes to." Marcus could only nod as they danced around another fight and entered. The interior of this place was no less chaotic than the exterior, with more of everything and anything happening as they moved about the place, or rather dodged around the constant moving groups of people, none of whom seemed to want to sit still, and all wanted to fight.
"Lucky, what are you doing down here? Giving up on your place?"
Marcus swiveled around another group of people to see that the bartender was waving over to his friend. Lucky eagerly waved back to him. "You wish, as that's the only way you'd get out of this place and into somewhere respectable."
"Lies! I would never leave this glorious home of mine. That only leaves the question, what are you here for?" "Well, to see her, of course."
The bartender only shook his head and returned to his work, leaving them alone to move the crowd that was busily moving around them and kept moving and stopped moving at the same time, whenever they felt like it, until they arrived at the door at the back of this bar. Lucky threw open this door and went downwards. Marcus, however, stopped, read the sign on the door. "Employees only. Enter at your own risk. Magic ahead." Although the magic part faded the second he'd read it. The smell of hops and alcohol were thick and heavy down in this basement, along with chilled spots, followed by warmth from cooking vats. This place seemed to be running all by itself, which had Marcus suspicious. The smells could certainly be a good way to hide the scent of magic, which often came with a burning smell. "Is this all run by the witch you told me about, Lucky?" Lucky, who was ahead of them, turned and nodded, and then pointed towards a vat. "She figured out a way to get it magically to go and go. I don't get it, but it works, I guess. I get some of my beer from here." They turned and carried on, walking deeper down this basement, which seemed to stretch for quite a while. The people above them either didn't know that the bar had stolen their basements. A sleek lantern, hovering off in the distance, suddenly rapidly approached. A young, svelte woman, if her long, slinky dress was anything to go by, approached them. Marcus looked her over carefully and felt a soft chill go down his spine.
"Who are these people, Lucky? And why are they with you?"
I'm sorry to bother you. This is the Bumbling Knight Marcus, and I think his assistant Henry. They were looking into the matter of the princess. I did send a message ahead. I hope it arrived." She merely pointed towards Lucky, who froze in place. "You will stay here, then, Lucky. However, you two, Marcus Bumbling Knight or whatever, and Henry, assistant to the Bumbling Knight, will follow me." They followed quickly, as Marcus found he could not help it. There was the arm of magic working very potently, and there would be no resistance, he found. As they headed further into the vat room, this witch, she had only turned a little bit and began walking a little further on, towards an area that looked like it would be a regular basement. However, with a wave of her hands, she erased much of this image of a cold, dark basement wall. It was replaced by the warmth of more brewing vats that were churning away. The place looked infinitely smaller than it previously had, and Marcus could only shake his head as he felt his feet moving along. Yes, Mr. Marcus, this is all a mirage of an image. It's fun magic to play around with and keeps things and people guessing. Why are you seeking out this princess?" "I was hired by 2 parties to bring her back to the Rock Kingdom." "The Black Knights and Castleworth. And yes, I am reading your mind. Please do keep up." She'd moved away from them, and they, under her magic orders, kept putting one foot in front of the other, and even sped up a little bit. They were led towards a back wall, where a small hidden-away nook of a door seemed to be too small for them to go into. Yet as they approached it, they seemed to easily fit in, and were soon in what appeared to be an office. Marcus looked at the door, which seemed to have gotten much bigger than them, and this tiny office seemed to fit them perfectly fine. He moved and took a seat across from the witch, who was smiling at him as she moved around to her desk. "Yes, we have shrunken down according to the magic law put on this space. And yes, it was put here by me. Now, what is it about the princess you wish to know, or what rescuing are you doing? What are you doing?" Marcus pulled the partially translated note from its hidden spot near his breast pocket. He gently tossed it onto her desk. "You were at least partially responsible for that translation, I believe, and I would like you to complete your translation." "And how would you know that, Mr. Bumbling Knight?" "They need a witch to get the code to put the whole thing together, one who isn't far away, and one who is smart enough to know when to use a situation to her advantage, say, to get them to pay more money, or to get them to pay at the very least." He reached into his own purse and pulled out 3 gold coins and tossed them on top of the note. Her grin grew. "Well, Mr. Marcus, aren't you a smart one?" She carefully picked up the coins and weighed them in her hand. "Orsfield gold. You'll find it of good quality to melt down should you need it for magic." "The letter demands payment for a princess. It sets a date of 3 months to gather the price stated. My sister witches wanted the money dumped upriver near the witches' woods. They also demanded a little less persecution from the Rock Kingdom." Of course, nothing stating where that drop might be, so is there any chance a bumbling knight like myself might be able to stumble across them in these woods? She shook her head no. "And is there a way to at least find these witches to go talk to them?" "Well, that would be a little more complicated." Oh,
do they not let men in?"
"No, Mr. Henry, they do. The problem is they don't like commoners like yourselves." "And they're asking for fair treatment outside of their homes while putting up that front? People are not going to like that. But that, however, isn't getting us any closer to them and the princess and or the money needed to do this. So, Miss Witch, what are you saying?" "No, that is not going to help them, I agree. Your options for getting to them are rather limited overall, but you do have 2 that might work. There is a caravan driver who goes between the 2 cities. She might take you. or there is renting a boat and hoping that you run into the city of Caledonia all on your own. The option of the caravan comes with issues, does it not, Miss Witch? She smiled again. Yes, the owner of the caravan does not like men, so on that front you would have to disguise your manliness, Marcus, though Henry here probably wouldn't have nearly as much of an issue. With a sigh, Marcus rose from his chair, scratching his head. This would take some thinking, and in a magical lair of a witch, it probably was not the best place to do any such thinking. I shall think on it, if you'll excuse us. Cassia sat back in her chair, and with a wave of her hand, they were instantly gone. In a flash of light, they found themselves standing once again next to Lucky, who jumped when he saw them appear. The big man shook his head violently and blinked a few times. She always does that, sending people back in such a fashion. I never get used to it. Do you often bring people to meet this witch? And, can you give me her name? Oh, yes, from time to time. Yes. Why? It's, Cassia, by the way. Henry, who had adjusted at all to what had happened to him, grabbed at Marcus's arms. What happened? There was an office and now a brewery, and we didn't move an inch, I don't think. I don't know. Is this your first time with magic, Henry? We moved from one place to the next, or we were just made to believe that we moved to the office, and she had our entire conversation right here. Don't know if that's true or not. Either way, nothing bad has happened. As for your question, Mr. Lucky, as to why, I was just curious to see who knows about her, and if she might be in any danger. A good witch is worth keeping around, don't you think? Though she probably does all right all on her own. Shall we head back to your inn, sir? Lucky nodded to this, and turned to head back towards the stairs, and leading them all the way back the way they came. They managed to make it all the way back to Lucky's place, but it was night by the time they came to a stop behind his inn. The innkeep was exhausted and struggling to get the back door to his place unlocked, which made Marcus quickly step in and get it opened. However, with the weight of carrying Henry and Lucky leaning on him, it caused all three to fall inside once the door did come unlocked. It took them more than a minute for the three to sort themselves out and finally managing to get up, each struggling off of one another and struggling to get out of the kitchen in search of nearby beds for which they could sleep in. The screech of a bird in the window woke Marcus up the next morning as he blearily blinked to sleep away. The bed was warm and comfy, and the last thing he wanted to do was get up right now. But he also figured that things were probably moving forward with the princess, and they would not wait around for him. He tossed his sheets off of him and got up. As he stepped out into the hallway from his bedroom, he found a mug of some sort was stuffed into his hands. It was steaming hot, and he took it gingerly before looking up to see that Cassia was leaning against the other wall. She looked curious and impish, like something was up with her. Marcus wondered if she was really trustworthy or even really there. She seemed to have some powerful magic, which she used on a whim to keep herself happy. To answer your question, I can't hold the caravan for more than this morning. Then I shall hire a boat. She raised an eyebrow at this, and didn't seem to think that it was a good idea, but it was his, and he didn't want to have to deal with people who didn't like males. You have exactly a week before the whole thing goes up in flames. My caravan friend can get you there in 2 days. Sorry, I still choose to hire a boat. A flash of anger crossed her face, and was gone in an instant. She returned to her normal self with clouded eyes, and a flick of independence that always had her head tilted just up. Marcus looked her up and down once again, deciding that she might just be there in front of him, but it was hard to get an exact feel for if she was exactly there. And why would you not choose the caravan? You, Miss Cassia, the witch of whatever, have yet to tell me any of why this might be happening. I think you know more than you're letting on to. Other than the demand for equality from the witches, It doesn't make sense, and there was something left unsaid on that note that you, I feel, have not translated." She made a face that said that she'd been caught, and then, with a wave of her hand, was gone in a puff of smoke. With nothing else to do, he took a sip from the mug and made a face. It was a weak, leafy drink, popular on some islands, but not to his taste. Henry had followed him out of the bedroom, yawning. "All right, Henry, you gotta get your luggage and get down for breakfast. We don't have any more time to be around here." The young man took another yawn, and then spun around on one foot and went right back into the bedroom. It took them a little while to get organized, and a few more coins than Marcus would have liked to settle things with Lucky, the innkeeper. Still, they were off and headed for the city river docks, doing their best to fight their crowds in the market plaza place. Things felt like they were going okay, but Marcus also felt like he'd only managed to piss off both the Black Knights, the witches, and the Knights of the City, maybe, but he wasn't sure if they were a thing or if they were the Black Knights. Something was wrong, and the witches, if Cassia told on him, would be on the lookout for him, and then the Knights, or just the Rock Kingdom, were going to look for a way to swoop in when he least expected it. They managed to thread their way through this crowd, and then soon found themselves bombarded by the caw of angry birds, who were looking for any random fish that they could swoop in and steal. When no fish weren't to be found, it often would rain bird poop from the skies until fish were presented, and these docks that they found themselves on were not a happy place. After a while and a few questions to local sailors, Marcus found himself in front of a dock office, a place where one might be able to rent out a boat or hire one with a crew. The latter option would be an expensive one, and the Bumbling Knights didn't have that kind of expense account. He reached for the door handle with a sigh, and hoped that too many questions would not be asked of why he needed said boat. Inside, the bustle and buzz of a work office that had work orders and sailors moving about to do said work caught Marcus slightly off guard. This, after all, was the lobby of the dock office. It should be busy, but it was a lobby, and chaos should be happening behind the front desk, unseen. He found himself bumped into by a surly-looking man with more tattoos than his body knew what to do with, and earned a glare for standing there.
"What you standing around for, lubber? This is a working office when we don't stand when boats are sailing."
Marcus rubbed his side where the hard bump had hit him. Sorry, my fault. I was looking to be able to rent a boat."
"Upstairs, third floor on the right. Now you better move."
The sailor was gone just as suddenly as he had appeared, and Marcus decided moving was in fact a very, 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 very good idea. He hurried to find the set of stairs, and perhaps, he hoped, a little less chaos. Since the lobby was chaos, it made sense that everything would be backwards, right? He and Henry found that as they got up the staircase to the third floor, it, however, was much like the first floor. Everyone was constantly moving and working. If one found themselves on one side of the hallway that they were in, they would only move one direction, and crossing over to the other side of the hallway was no easy task. The other side had people busily walking the other way, and so they found themselves doing a few laps of this hallway, and in their journey they recognized a few faces who seemed to be caught in the same predicament as they were. But this only lasted a little while before Marcus managed to get to the door they needed and bolted in. The rental office was a clean, simple affair of a room. It had only one desk and one man sitting behind this desk. There was quite literally nothing else aside from that, and possibly the chair the man was sitting on. But Marcus had a feeling that the man might not have been given a chair, as they stepped closer towards them. In fact, it appeared as they stepped closer and stopped in front of this person that he was in fact sitting on a box. "Are you here to rent a boat?" The man had grabbed up a piece of blank paper from a pile of papers and had already begun furiously writing on it, all without taking the slightest look up. Yes, a boat for 2 people and no need for a crew." "Where are you taking the boat?" "Up river towards the city of Wood. How long will you be in the city of Wood? 2 weeks, maybe. And do you plan to go through the Witch's Woods on your journey? Marcus and Henry both didn't actually say no, but they shook their heads no. The boat rental agent person stopped writing as he waited for a response. When one never came, he finally looked up to see their heads shaking no. I will pretend that you aren't, but work on your lying faces for when you drop the boat off at the Wood Kingdom, or do you plan to return the boat here? I think a return might be likely. With a flurry, the man finished writing the piece of paper. He looked it over, and then looked up once again. It costs 3 silver for the pieces of paper. You'll be expected to pay the boatyard 20 copper for the boat. Okay? Marcus changed his nod from a no to a yes as he fetched the coin and received the paper in return. After managing to fight their way back through the rough boat office, which threatened to twirl them around again and again, they emerged and set off for the long row of docks. The further down they went, the noise and roar of the waterfall became, but they did stop at Click and Clacker's boat ship emporium of vessels. Here lay the wrecks of several rental boats and 2 men sitting on rocking chairs near the edge of one of the wharves. Marcus found his way down onto the wharf and came up to the 2 old men who were busily hemming and hawing over something. All the while they furiously rocked away on their rocking chairs.
The boat broke because it had a hole in it. Yes, I already agreed to the whole theory. The whole theory. But I maintain that the sail rigging put the hole there when it collapsed. And then, when it was fixed by someone, they failed to notice that the whole hole was there. Then the boat got thrown back into the water, and it breaks.
The second man was furiously rocking in his chair as he exclaimed all of this.
No. That doesn't make any sense, brother.
Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm here to rent a boat. One of the men, the second one to speak, pointed towards a boat at the end of the wharf, while the other held out his hand. Marcus handed over both paper and money, and the paper was given the briefest of looks before being handed back over to him.
It's an okay boat, but don't expect it to come back in one piece. No.
I will do my best to return it in one piece, though.
If you run into any witches with it, don't tell us. It's already a broken heap as is.
This caught Marcus in an awkward spot. These 2 apparent brothers were telling him that the boat he was renting was crap. How was one supposed to respond to being told that they'd just been rented a heap of junk? He did the only thing he could do, which was head down to the boat, hoping it was not as bad as they were claiming it was. He clambered aboard the tiny 1-sail vessel with rows and a small cabin towards the back. Marcus feared the worst upon seeing it. It was a ship in terrible shape, judging from the way the deck was uneven, and that several of the ship's side railings were not even anywhere to be seen. Oh, jeez. Henry, if you could clean up the deck of any debris. I'm going to the cabin and maybe below to see if we have any more problems with the ship, like potentially holes that got put into it. Henry began to zip around the deck, looking for loose wood and items to pick up and fix. Marcus trudged his way over towards the cabin and entered it, and came to a stop as he looked around the small space. It had enough room for 3 beds, a helm, a wheel, and nothing else, though he also did his best to pretend that he did not see Cassia leaning against the wheel as he turned to go back out. No, hello? No. Why are you here, Miss Witch? You need a witch to get you to the Witching Woods, do you not? And, well, I'm bored, so... She was past him in an instant and out of the cabin. Henry, who had already finished clearing the deck, having worked in a quick manner that surprised Marcus. He didn't expect this boy to have it in him to work like that. It was all done. He glanced over to see Cassia, who'd taken up a spot near the bow, and seemed to see if she had anything to do with any of this, but she seemed uninterested in them, or helping them. Miss Cassia, I only have enough food for me and the boy for a 2-week trip. You will have to sustain yourself." Without looking over, she waved her hand as if she didn't care about that, and he could only shrug and went over towards Henry. "You see the ropes that go from our boat to the wharf?" "Yes, sir." "I need you to pull them off the poles and toss them onto the boat when I'm in position, okay?" The young boy nodded and then scurried back over towards the wharf and got into his position. Marcus found the oars that should allow him to position the boat and push it along. They were long rods of things not designed for rowing, but straight pushes. He went towards the bow and sunk his stick firmly towards the bottom of the water until it felt like it was on firm ground below. Once it was done, he signaled to Henry, who unhooked all of these ropes as quickly as he could, and then jumped back aboard. With a mighty push, once the boy was aboard, Marcus spun the vessel about and began the process of getting the boat upriver and away from the waterfall. It took much effort, and running back and forth from the bow to the stern of this 60-foot craft. The ship moved through the water unhappily as it tended to veer to one side, either the left, and then when he tried to correct it, it would veer to the right. That was fixed when Henry eventually took the wheel and kept them going straight, until they finally reached the skirts of the proper city and its castle without much problem, aside from the heavy rowing that Marcus was having to do, which was becoming quite exhausting. The waterways were clear of traffic, and everything seemed to calm as they transitioned to where the water did not feel like it was going to pull them down the river and down the waterfall as a result. Marcus, however, did not stop his work of rowing as hard as he could. The twists and the turn of the river cutting its way through the city, outside of the city walls, helped calm the water further, and the traffic, though increased tenfold, with lots of small zippy boats and some bigger ships carrying goods moved about, the waterway was clogged with them as they caught from one direction to the other. They kept going despite all of this, and soon the traffic would clear a bit more and ease out as they got closer to the edge of the improper city of rock outside of the proper city of rock. Once clear of the city itself, with a wave of her hand, Cassia used her magic to unfurl the sail on the boat, and then she put wind into it. The boat nearly picked the bow out of the water with the gust of wind, sending it sputtering across the water, and Cassia, with a rueful grin, waved her hand once again to lessen the wind a little bit. She seemed to be rather enjoying herself, which worried Marcus. He knew witches could be good people, but they also had a tendency to do things for themselves, first anyway, instead of for the greater good. What this witch was up to he may never know, but it worried him, and this trip would be a little bit easier with her helping. But to trust her? She was cute, but He looked up at the darkened sky that was beginning to twinkle, with star lights above them. It was getting late, and he and Henry had yet to eat since breakfast. "Miss Cassia, do you mind if us humans get some food into us? I am a human as well, and I would love some food." She had stood up at this, and then strolled past him towards the cabin. Marcus could only shake his head confused, for what seemed like the millionth time today, and turned and followed. Henry had already opened the rucksack that they'd brought with them, and had a piece of ham in his hands, ready to chomp down on it. Cassia had seen this and had waved her hand, and the meat floated out of the young man's hands. "That is not how you share your supplies, young man." Then, with a wave of her hand again, the chunk of meat split into a variety of sections, evenly dividing it up. The ham then floated to the ground as Marcus came in. A piece fell right into Henry's lap, and he hungrily gobbled it down. "I took the liberty of dividing the rations further, which should be enough for all of us. And of course that along with the wind should be enough to earn me some rations, don't you think, Mr. Bumbling Knight?" This day and trip were not going well, and he could only sigh to himself and shake his head. It would have to do, wouldn't it? He took a small portion of meat that had landed near him and sat down to nibble on it. "Yes, I suppose it is more than enough for rations, Miss Cassia. I am surprised that you didn't magically make some food. She pulled a disgusted face at him, and at the sound of that. I do not dabble in the dreaded arts of alchemy. Those idiots practice the art of fooling everyone out of their money with the promise to make stuff. Then they vanish. I cannot make things out of nothing. Sorry to bring it up. I did not know. I was not aware. Her face did not change much from the disgusted look as she ate, and Marcus decided to leave before he said anything else that might piss her off. The ship had continued sailing up the river, allowing Marcus to sit back and think about matters once he was outside. There was a kidnapping by witches whose demands were recognition and money, none of which they would get because they made demands. Then there was the whole hierarchy of rock, who seemed to be in shambles and trying to get one over on one another. Castleworthy or the Black Knights or whoever was on top certainly seemed to be fighting. That this was not a new thing, especially in royalty and hierarchies, but it was still quite a problem to deal with. It felt like a game was being played with no one winning at the moment. Henry had emerged from the cabin, still looking rather hungry, and Marcus tossed over the last of the meat over to the boy. Eat up and rest up. I have a feeling that things will be odd tomorrow. Henry deftly caught this food, and then scurried off to some corner of the boat to eat this. Marcus watched over the boat and then realized that it was shifting slightly towards the bank and hurried into the cabin. As he threw open the door, he found a half-changed Cassia making herself comfortable. She was in a sleeping shirt and little else. Ah! Calm down, I've seen women before, and I need to get to the wheel. She glowered at him as he went over to the helm and pulled it to the starboard side, a minor degree. The ship responded, and through the open door he could see the shoreline on his port move to the left a little, out of view. With that done, he turned to her and see that she'd turned a bit scarlet. Well, there's a sight I did not expect, as I figured witches were very much beyond being embarrassed by anything. Well, that shall teach me to theorize about life and witches and people, I guess. If you could watch over the helm and make sure that it doesn't, wander about, I will leave you with the cabin. Having already let go of the helm, Marcus marched out with a little smile on his face. The night passed, and the early morning found themselves cruising easily up the river, though the bottom of this river did seem to be coming up further and further, which worried Marcus, but not as much as the bridge they were approaching. It spanned the entirety of the river, all 200 feet across, and of course, since there was a bridge, there would be trolls under it, since trolls had nothing better to do but sit under the bridges or other objects whenever they felt like it and take up passing people's time. The little boat, with its sail, was nearly completely under the bridge and just about to the other side without anything happening. Marcus had kept a lookout for the troll, which hadn't appeared, when a thunk landed behind him. His shoulders fell, and then he felt himself going over the side of the boat to manic laughter. Yah! Yah! The water flooded around Marcus as he touched the bottom of the river, and he did his best to instantly push himself back up and then look around the clear water. He could make out the bottom of the boat and that it was turning. With all his might, he began swimming hard towards the surface, his lungs begging for a bit of air. He broke through the surface of the river rock and found himself just a little bit downriver on the other side of the bridge. The boat they'd rented had gone to his right into the shore, beaching itself. He was on the left, and after taking a few moments to breathe, he found his strength and began paddling his way towards the right-hand side of the shore. Dragging himself out of the water, he found himself at the road crossing to the bridge. On the other side of this bridge was the boat, and sparks of magic flying all around the boat. The troll was an ugly grey beast that had horns coming from both sides of its mouth, and on top of its head as well. He could barely make this creature out, but he could clearly see it moving around the boat in a sort of dancing, hee-haw fashion. It was a dance that allowed this creature, this beast, to dodge all around the magic and continue his awful hee-haw laughter. Marcus began heading over towards them as the troll landed on the ground on the shore, with Cassia jumping over the side to continue their fight. The duel of magic sparking from Cassia's hand, and the troll rolling, jumping, and tilting about, kept going for another minute until her energy began to wane, and the sparks began to die from her hand. "Ha! Yeah! Is this all you've got? Lazy people, you must pay the toll to cross my bridge!" Fortunately, the troll was not paying attention, and Marcus came up right behind it, grabbing the humanoid creature by the waist and doing his best to throw it towards the river. The troll was only about an inch or two shorter than him, and this task of throwing him did not go easily. But with a mighty push and a throw, the creature went in with a splash. "We didn't cross over your bridge, troll. We crossed under it." He did not wait to see if his handiwork was completed, as he moved over to Cassia and in a swoop picked up her tired form from sitting on the little sandy beach and rushed them towards the boat. After a few seconds of grappling and trying to lift both himself and Cassie onto the boat, he succeeded, and she, with some of her remaining energy, used a heavy gust of wind to push the boat off of the shoreline. It, however, was all for naught, as the troll jumped back onto the boat, landing heavily on the deck. "Money!" "No money for you." "You owe me money for crossing under the bridge. Pay or be eaten." Neither of those choices are appealing to me and my boat crew. The troll took a step forward, getting ready to lunge at them, when a thunk hit the back of its head. The creature then pitched forward, looking dazed, but not completely out of it. Behind it stood Henry, trembling arms, looking wild-eyed, confused, and elated that he had a thick piece of plank in his hands. "Well done, Henry. A not-so-thought-out plan, though. Make sure you keep thinking about such things and planning. Cassia, if you have any energy left, can you hold this thing to the deck for a second?" She nodded weakly and waved her hands about to use her magic. Marcus, on the other hand, headed towards the ship's cabin and began rummaging about the sides of this place, among the junk that they'd moved in there. He found some rope and tested its strength to make sure it would hold, then checked to see if he had enough for the troll before heading back outside. When he came onto the deck, he went straight over to this troll and pulled its arms back behind its back to begin hog-tying it up so that it couldn't escape. "Why don't you just throw it over the side?" "Don't you know trolls don't like leaving their bridges? This will teach it a little lesson as it watches its home go away. Then a bit down the river we will drop it off. Don't worry." The troll was beginning to come around again from a semi-conscious state and began to struggle against its binds. "Let me go! Pay my toll! I'll eat you!" Marcus ignored all of this as he dragged the beast towards the back of the boat. The stern of this vessel had little room for anything, as the back of the cabin jutted towards it, giving only a foot or two of space back there. There was also the problem of the keel, which jutted out from the back of the stern and was close to the deck in case of a helm failure. Marcus did not want to tie the troll up to an important part of the ship, so he shuffled the creature off towards the port side of the stern and lashed him there towards the railing, just hanging over it. His original plan of having the troll dangled over the side was thrown out because he wasn't sure if he could lift the thing over the edge. "No, don't make me leave my home. I've never been away from home." "Well, you shouldn't be extorting people's money." "It's a government job. The Rock Kingdom hired me to patrol the bridge and collect monies. I pay them most of what I get. Otherwise, they threaten to lop off my head." "Well, it was your choice. You'll soon be free to choose again." "No!" Marcus did his best to ignore the long and annoying howl. Marcus finally came around back towards the front of the boat. He could see that the wind had gone out of the sail as Cassia was now sleeping. Henry was beside her, trying to wake her up with no success, and the boat was now beginning to head backwards down the river. "Henry, take up the paddle and push it upriver. I'll take care of the witch." Marcus moved over and scooped up Cassia once again, and then headed straight for the cabin. He walked into the cabin carefully, trying his best not to disturb the witch because he did not know what would happen. You don't want to disturb witches when they're sleeping. Now was not the time for random discharges of magic flying about the place. So he set her carefully on the ground and went about finding his rucksack of supplies. After a while, he came up with a vial and went back to Cassia. I do hope you don't mind potions, Miss Cassia, made by a conjurer. He pulled the stopper on it and gently fed the contents into her mouth. A second later, she spit back to life. What was that? Essence of energy or some such thing from a potion conjurer. Hope it doesn't go against your witchy ways, and sorry if it does, but I'd rather have a person helping us out in good state. Rest up, we will take care of things for a while. He rose from kneeling next to her and left her as she continued to spit and cough to get the taste of the stuff out of her mouth. End of part 2. Thank you for listening.